Good afternoon and welcome to the fifth and final Linx Webinar for 2018. I'm Chris Lutat. I'll be facilitating today's talk. I'm the Managing Partner at Convergent Performance and author of Automation Airmanship. Topic today is briefings. And the title of our presentation for today is For Your Team's Best Performance, Give Your Best Briefing. We're going to start with two questions like we've started our previous webinars. Number one, do your briefings contain too much, too little, or just the right amount of important information? Questions you need to ask yourself as we go through today's presentation. Number two, how do your briefings, the briefings you're giving today, map to the latest Linx SOPs? So to simplify what we're trying to accomplish today, number one, we want to provide emphasis on the importance of the briefing as a multiplier for your own and your team's performance, especially in 21st century airspace, flying 21st century airplanes. In addition to that, we want to relate the best briefing knowledge available today to the new Linx SOPs, and we'll discuss that in detail towards the end of today's talk. So just a few scenarios where you might apply this training immediately after today's webinar. Consider this as overhead knowledge as you work to adopt the latest Linx SOPs. What you learned today may help you understand some of the motivation behind some of the changes to the briefing standards for Linx. You can use this information for the first briefing of the day and your last, beginning tomorrow or on your next flight leg. And anytime, as a captain or pilot flying, you ask this question: does my briefing I gave earlier need to be changed so my fellow crew members know my intent going forward? You can use all of the content from today's talk. Before we get into the nuts and bolts of a truly good briefing, let's talk about some real-world facts about briefings. There's no one-size-fits-all briefing. Big surprise, right? The fact is, situations are unique every day, every flight leg. Conditions change, weather, crew composition. The experience of members of the team often varies. We have extremely veteran pilots working alongside, in some cases, brand new hires. Available time can be short or long, especially when there's a change of plans. And the real world, as always, is likely to intervene, presenting new variables in a situation that you expected to be stable. And there's a couple things before any briefing begins that already exists in the minds of the team members you're working with. First of all, what we're able to provide in a briefing is only a small portion of what that person or members of the team that we're briefing already have in mind about what we're about to do. So whether we give a good briefing, a poor briefing, or no briefing at all, we're probably going to get some kind of effort from the members of our team towards what we want to accomplish. But in order to get exactly what we need, tailored to the threats and the challenges that we face today, we need to really shape that briefing and be very, very targeted in the way that we deliver it. So what we brief should be made important if we expect that person or those members of our team to remember what we said and to act on any new incoming information or new distractions in the way that we want them to, so that we can accomplish what we need to accomplish for the day. We've compiled a list of 8 or 9 things that go into a truly good briefing, and we put that list together here. Let's talk about them all one at a time. Maybe the most accurate and obvious aspect of our talk today, the facts about a truly good briefing, is that they work best when they contain realistic and practical steps towards a reasonably achievable goal. We definitely want to be specific, and we definitely want to tailor our briefing for the actual challenges that we have in front of us for the day. Now, here's a hard part. Truly good briefings do not include rote and already understood SOPs, procedural steps, and norms. This is what I call the broken briefing or the broken record briefing. That sounds like we've heard the same information again and again and again. if you've given or heard the same briefing again and again and again for differing conditions or on days when there are new challenges and threats, you're probably in need of refreshing the way that you give your briefings. Because we can assume most of the time, unless we're dealing with improficient or brand new crew members, that the people and team members we're briefing, they live in the same shared culture with the same common references to how things work in the environment that we work in at JetLinx all of the time. Truly good briefings clearly convey the intent of the briefer. And conveying intent is like giving other members of your team a crystal ball for how to respond to challenges as they come up later in the flight or later in the flight day. Obviously, to capture the attention of those being briefed is a key element of a truly good briefing. And to do this, we need to deliver a very good briefing in an environment of minimal distractions, which usually for us means behind the cockpit door or behind the cockpit curtain with the parking brake set, if possible. Truly good briefings are always a two-way communication. Here are some words that I use when I brief my first officers. I look them straight in the eye and tell them, I'm not just telling you these things. I want you to know. I want to know about what you know about our challenges today and where I might have made a mistake or erred in evaluating the threats that we're facing. What do you know about the location, about our destination, about the condition of the aircraft, or about any other factors involved with today's flight? It's a whole lot different than finishing a briefing and saying, any questions? I think you get the point. Truly good briefings also allow for adaptation, especially when you're taxiing out to a very complicated runway complex, and there's a chance that you might get a runway change for departure. And the same goes for when you're arriving at an airport with a complicated runway structure and you're expecting the possibility of a runway change. Having both of those contingencies briefed before you leave the blocks is a key element of a truly good briefing that delivers excellent results down the road. And here's the real test of a truly good briefing. Does it make the job of everyone on the team easier to accomplish? Does it result in outcomes better than that would be possible if the situation was preceded by no briefing or a poor briefing? In simpler terms, does it lighten the weight in your team member's pack? Or does it just pile on more weight, more confusion, and more ambiguity? Make sure that your briefings lighten the weight in the packs of your team members. Now, for the last months and maybe even a couple of years, the JetLinx standards, safety, training, and management team have been working hard to improve the briefing and to bring the JetLinx briefing into the 21st century. To their credit, they've really looked carefully at some of the 21st century threats that face JetLinx crew members operating in a wide variety of airports, operating a wide variety of aircraft. Some requirements in the new SOPs are to brief hotspots, hold short locations, displace thresholds, and runway status lights. All things with very, very unique situations surrounding them. And in the case of runway status lights, new technology that is increasingly present at complicated airports all over the world. On the first flight of the day, the abort and engine failure briefings must be conducted. And while en route, use this acronym, VVM, verbalize, verify, and monitor to continuously brief even the smallest changes to the FMC flight path. In that way, no member of the cockpit team is caught off guard or sees as ambiguous a particular constraint, whether it's a speed constraint or an altitude constraint. And brief the use of appropriate lateral and vertical modes, particularly in advance of a climb via or a descend via clearance. And when you're in climb, cruise, or descent, independently review and concur on airspeed and altitude restrictions. These are both components of 21st century clearance into 21st century airspace, and they're going to become more and more predominant in our work environment. Brief the arrival, brief the approach, and the missed approach off of the FMC entries and the Jeppesen briefing strip. Don't just use the chart. After all, what the airplane is going to do, in all likelihood, especially when coupled to flight guidance and autoflight, is what's in the box. And then don't forget the taxi procedure. In other words, fly this leg all the way to the blocks. And of course, address special considerations, high terrain, low visibility. That's pretty obvious, but those conditions change from day to day. And address or resolve any concerns of the other pilot. Remember, a truly good briefing is interactive. It's not just a one-way communication. Let's talk about this for just a minute, visual approaches, and what makes this approach so risky. Many of the accidents that we've seen in the past decade and many of the accidents that we'll see in coming decades are likely going to be tied to a visual approach clearance. It's sad, but it's true. We seem to get a visual approach clearance and let down our guard just a little bit. Many of us have learned the hard way, including me, that when I hear visual approach clearance issued to my aircraft by ATC, I sit up a little straighter and move a little bit closer to the rotor pedals. Here are a couple of the reasons why a visual approach is a very, very risky maneuver. In the case of a visual approach, the crew provides all of the descent, arrival, approach planning, and execution. Think about that for a minute. Generally, all of us are relieved when we get a visual approach clearance. We call the airport in sight, we call any traffic if there is any, and then we begin our plan. If we haven't carefully considered our plan, we're setting ourselves up for a potential problem as we approach the airport. Not having to comply with the constraints of an RNAV arrival and an instrument approach, very much like our first point, removes the accuracy and the SA that these procedures provide, particularly with regard to terrain clearance, both vertically and laterally. Now, it's also a fact that we don't talk about a lot, but many visual approaches occur at periods of our circadian low, early morning or late at night. And it makes sense that we often get a visual approach early in the morning or late at night because flatly, the airport that we're flying to, the traffic is not that heavy. So visual approaches are more likely in that scenario. And they also add on the additional potential for fatigue. Now, it always seems easier than it is. I'll admit, I love when ATC gives me a visual approach clearance. But I have to tell you, I've increased my level of readiness and my level of preparation over the years in order to make sure that none of these problems that we have listed on this particular page enter as a real threat to knock us off our game. So, JetLinx management standards, safety, and training have combined to put together briefing standards for visual approaches at JetLinx. Now, the first point, we have to brief the airport name, elevation, and MSA. Sure sounds obvious. But if you've ever talked to an aircrew that's landed at the wrong airport, you've talked to a crew that hasn't briefed the airport name, elevation, and MSA for their destination. Once again, we tend to let down our guard when we're given a visual approach clearance. The instrument approach backup is also required to be briefed. And if you can, it's a very, very good industry best practice to back up a visual approach with an instrument approach that has vertical guidance as well. Again, using some of the technology on board your airplane and inside your cockpit to back yourself up, especially with respect to terrain and terrain clearance. Of course, special communications and traffic procedures for non-tower airports. The last moment to discuss turning on the pilot-controlled lighting on any given field is when you're passing over the final approach fix or on a 3-mile final on a visual approach. And of course, the lighting aids at the respective destination to include taxiway lights. And of course, the missed approach plan. If you haven't briefed a missed approach plan carefully, you're less likely to perform a missed approach and to take a fast or unstable approach and make a very unsafe landing out of that. And of course, your taxi plan. Remember, these are required briefing standards for visual approaches at JetLinx, and for good reason. Using and applying these standards will keep you out of the risk-laden danger zones for a visual approach that are associated with many operations in airports. And remember this, a good briefing is one that makes everybody's job on the flight deck easier to accomplish, and the outcomes are better than would be possible if the situation was preceded by no briefing or poor briefing. My objective in every briefing I give is to make my fellow crew members' packs just a little bit lighter by projecting my intent, interacting with them so that I understand what the threats are that they understand, and the particular areas that are unique today that they see, so that we all combine to make a tightly integrated, high-performing team. Now, this image shouldn't be new. We've added this at the end of all of our webinars. It's the performance evolution ladder. It's been around for 2 decades, and it's been put in use at operations all over the world. I want to direct your attention to the saying in the upper left-hand quadrant of this particular slide. Mediocrity knows nothing higher than itself. Oftentimes, especially in a highly compliant environment as aviation, we stop our efforts at the compliance line. Anything above that is considered extra, icing on the cake, gravy. But if we restrict our effort, our performance, our training, and our own standards for ourselves to the compliance line, we find ourselves never exceeding the good enough aspect of our professional standards. Dr. Kern calls this the crushing grip of mediocrity. I call it the magnetic pull of the norm. If we stay here, if we never shoot above this line, if we never work hard to improve the quality and effectiveness of our briefing, to manage the flight path and the climb and the descent, to be always ready to fly the airplane first, should the automation behave in a way that we don't expect, we may not be prepared on the day that our survival depends on precision and perfection. If we do, however, work hard to improve our performance and exceed the compliance line in every area of the operation, our performance begins to really accelerate. And when we do have to perform in a survival situation, we're ready for it. Now, just to summarize some of the things that we've talked about in discussing how we're going to improve our briefings and how the JetLinx SOPs have brought out the importance of some of the very specific and high-risk areas in today's briefing. I want to remind you that just because you've been to an airport recently, just because you might be familiar with a crew member you're flying with, and perhaps you've had some of the problems that you might encounter today as recently as just yesterday, simply giving a briefing that says, don't worry, everything will be fine. We did this last week. Let's do it the same way we did last Thursday, is the equivalent of just blindly setting a trap and hoping that something walks into it. Now, if you want to eliminate the problem and you want to trap the errors and risks in your operation, you have to consider the natural aspect of the problem you're trying to solve and understand the real-world risk and the unique threats that that particular problem presents. Don't blindly set a trap and hope something walks into it. Now, we talk about the second principle of automation airmanship in the 5th chapter of our book, Automation Airmanship, on briefing and debriefing. You'll get a lot more information there. But if you want to go directly to a recent posting, you can just put Automation Airmanship blog in your search engine on your mobile device or your computer, and it will take you right there, where there is an entire archive of talks just like today. You can email me directly at clutat@convergentperformance.com, or you can connect with me on LinkedIn, just like several of your other crew members have at JetLinx. Thanks for your time. We'll look forward to hearing from you, and good luck and fly safely.